Episode 32.
The chair recognizes Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Under Secretary to the Minister,
said Fudge. The witch spoke in a fluttery, girlish, high-pitched voice that took Harry aback. He had been expecting a croak.
"I'm sure I must have misunderstood you, Professor Dumbledore,"
she said with a simper that left her big, round eyes as cold as ever.
"So silly of me. But it sounded for a teensy moment as though you were suggesting that the Ministry of Magic had ordered an attack on this boy."
She gave a silvery laugh that made the hairs on the back of Harry's neck stand up. A few other members of the Wizengamot laughed with her. It could not have been plainer that not one of them was really amused. If it is true that the Dementors are taking orders only from the Ministry of Magic, and it is also true that 2 Dementors attacked Harry and his cousin a week ago, then it follows logically that somebody at the Ministry might have ordered the attacks, said Dumbledore politely. Of course, these particular Dementors may have been outside Ministry control.
"There are no Dementors outside Ministry control,"
snapped Fudge, who had turned brick red. Dumbledore inclined his head in a little bow. Then undoubtedly the Ministry will be making a full inquiry into why 2 Dementors were so very far from Azkaban, and why they attacked without authorization.
"It is not for you to decide what the Ministry of Magic does or does not do, Dumbledore,"
snapped Fudge, now a shade of magenta, of which Uncle Vernon would have been proud. "Of course it doesn't," said Dumbledore mildly. "I was merely expressing my confidence that this matter will not go uninvestigated." He glanced at Madame Bones, who readjusted her monocle and stared back at him, frowning slightly.
"I would remind everybody that the behavior of these Dementors, if indeed they are not figments of this boy's imagination, is not the subject of this hearing,"
said Fudge.
"We are here to examine Harry Potter's offences under the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery."
"Of course we are," said Dumbledore. "But the presence of Dementors in that alleyway is highly relevant. Clause 7 of the decree states that magic may be used before Muggles in exceptional circumstances, and as those exceptional circumstances include situations that threaten the life of the wizard or witch himself, or witches, wizards, or Muggles present at the time of the—"
"We are familiar with Clause 7, thank you very much,"
snarled Fudge. "Of course you are," said Dumbledore courteously. "Then we are in agreement that Harry's use of the Patronus charm in these circumstances falls precisely into the category of exceptional circumstances it describes."
"If there were Dementors, which I doubt—"
"You have heard from an eyewitness," Dumbledore interrupted. "If you still doubt her truthfulness, call her back. Question her again. I am sure she would not object."
"That not,"
blustered Fudge, fiddling with the papers before him.
"I want this over today, Dumbledore."
"Oh, but naturally you would not care how many times you heard from a witness if the alternative was a serious miscarriage of judgment," said Dumbledore.
"Serious miscarriage, my hat!"
said Fudge at the top of his voice.
"Have you ever bothered to tot up the number of cock and bull stories this boy has come out with, Dumbledore, while trying to cover up his flagrant misuse of magic out of school? I suppose you've forgotten the hover charm he used 3 years ago."
"That wasn't me! It was a house elf!" said Harry.
"You see!"
roared Fudge, gesturing flamboyantly in Harry's direction.
"A house elf in a muggle house, I ask you."
"The house elf in question is currently in the employ of Hogwarts School," said Dumbledore. I can summon him here in an instant to give evidence, if you wish."
I haven't got time to listen to house elves. Anyway, that's not the only... He blew up his aunt, for God's sake.
Fudge shouted, banging his fist on the judge's bench and upsetting a bottle of ink. "And you very kindly did not press charges on that occasion, accepting, I presume, that even the best wizards cannot always control their emotions," said Dumbledore calmly, as Fudge attempted to scrub the ink off his notes.
And I haven't even started on what he gets up to at school.
But as the Ministry has no authority to punish Hogwarts students for misdemeanors at school, Harry's behavior there is not relevant to this inquiry," said Dumbledore, politely as ever, but now with a suggestion of coolness behind his words.
"Ooh," said Fudge. "Not our business what he does at school, eh? You think so?"
"The Ministry does not have the power to expel Hogwarts students, Cornelius, as I reminded you on the night of the 2nd of August," said Dumbledore. "Nor does it have the right to confiscate wands until charges have been successfully proven. Again, as I reminded you on the night of the 2nd of August. In your admirable haste to ensure that the law is upheld, you appear, inadvertently I am sure, to have overlooked a few laws yourself."
"Laws can be changed,"
said Fudge savagely. "Of course they can," said Dumbledore, inclining his head. "And you certainly seem to be making many changes, Cornelius. Why, in the few short weeks since I was asked to leave the Wizengamot, it has already become the practice to hold a full criminal trial to deal with a simple matter of underage magic." A few of the wizards above them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Fudge turned a slightly deeper shade of puce. The toad-like witch on his right, however, merely gazed at Dumbledore, her face quite expressionless. "As far as I am aware, however," Dumbledore continued, "there is no law yet in place that says this court's job is to punish Harry for every bit of magic he has ever performed. He has been charged with a specific offense, and he has presented his defense. All he and I can do now is await your verdict." Dumbledore put his fingertips together again and said no more. Fudge glared at him, evidently incensed. Harry glanced sideways at Dumbledore, seeking reassurance. He was not at all sure that Dumbledore was right in telling the Wizengamot in effect that it was about time they made a decision. Again, however, Dumbledore seemed oblivious to Harry's attempt to catch his eye. He continued to look up at the benches where the entire Wizengamot had fallen into urgent, whispered conversations. Harry looked at his feet. His heart, which seemed to have swollen to an unnatural size, was thumping loudly under his ribs. He had expected the hearing to last longer than this. He was not at all sure that he had made a good impression. He had not really said very much. He ought to have explained more fully about the Dementors, about how he had fallen over, about how he and Dudley had nearly been kissed. Twice he looked up at Fudge and opened his mouth to speak, but his swollen heart was now constricting his air passages, and both times he merely took a deep breath and looked back at his shoes. Then the whispering stopped. Harry wanted to look up at the judges, but found that it was really much, much easier to keep examining his laces.
"Those in favour of tearing the accused of all charges," said Madame Bones's booming voice.
Harry's head jerked upward. There were hands in the air, many of them, more than half. Breathing very fast, he tried to count, but before he could finish, Madame Bones had said,
"And those in favour of conviction."
Fudge raised his hand, and so did half a dozen others, including the witch on his right, and the heavily mustached wizard and the frizzy-haired witch in the second row.